Hey everyone, welcome back to QSR Nation, your go-to source for food service marketing and business strategies for success. Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of QSR Nation. This week we have Beth, Tony, and Grant. Unfortunately, we don't have Josh, but we think that he might actually be becoming a father today, officially. So we're going to allow him to have the day off. But we're coming to you today from PFS Brand's national headquarters here in Holt Summit, Missouri to discuss food service marketing and business strategies for success. So today it is our absolute pleasure to welcome back our former QSR Nation guest, Mr. Adrian Gostick. Adrian, thank you so much for joining us today. And we have...
Thank you. Thank you, Beth.
Awesome. We're really excited to have you here. And we're so excited because we have a topic to discuss what Adrian is doing with his upcoming book, Leading with Gratitude, which is co-authored by him and Chester Elton, and it is expected to be available on March 3rd. So first off, welcome, Adrian, back to QSR Nation.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks for your interest in our work. We really appreciate it.
Well, you guys have done some really great stuff. I mean... I don't think the first book that we read of yours was The Levity Effect.
Yep.
And kind of got us hooked on what you were bringing to the table. And then, of course, I believe the next one I read of yours was The Best Team Wins. And then just finished up the preview of Leading with Gratitude. And I tell you, it's really, really great stuff, especially for today's world and leadership. Really needs to read these books. I would say just across the board, whether you're a small business or a large one, you guys are putting out some really great material.
Oh, thanks very much. You know, it's been kind of fun to do this last book. The Leading with Gratitude has really changed my life as well as I'm writing it. You know, because usually we're writing because we feel like there's a need, there's a subject out there that our clients talk about as we go out and consult. This one's really come from the heart, and it's been amazing, how transformational it's been.
Well, tell us a little bit about kind of who you are for someone who may not be familiar with exactly all the different books, because you've done this a few times, more than just the three books that we've mentioned. You are a New York Times best-selling author. So it's kind of to give us a background of who you are and what you've done so far as an author.
No, thanks. My co-author, Chester Elton, and I, we run a company called The Culture Works. We've now surveyed more than 1 million employees in different organizations, and as the title of our organization suggests, we deal in culture. We help organizations put together robust, meaningful cultures where they have high levels of employee engagement. Because if your employees don't care, they're not going to care about your customers. That's where we begin our work. And so over the last 20 years, we've written, half or a dozen books. Half a dozen of them have been New York Times bestsellers, as you mentioned, and it's taken us around the world working with some amazing organizations. One of the people we work with a lot is Marshall Goldsmith, who's a fellow executive coach of ours, and we were sitting around with him probably about a year ago now, and we were just sort of talking about why, with all the work we do, Chester and I, we work with a lot of executives, coaching them, so does Marshall. And we talked about the idea of why, with all we know about how we should recognize and reward those people in our care, why do so few of us still do that? What is the psychology that's sort of holding us back from recognizing the value that's being created around us? So that's really where this new book, Leading with Gratitude, began.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a great book. I mean, as I got into it, I thought, well, I've got a short time here. I'm gonna skim this, kind of get myself familiar with it. And as I started reading through it, I was hooked. I started the book last night at about 6 o'clock, and I finished it around 11:30, and I couldn't put it down. Even my son was like, "Dad, you're usually an Audible guy. What's up with this?" And I was like, "Hey, this is actually good." I said, this is like surprising. A lot of people think, oh, it's a business book, dry.
Yeah.
The one thing I love about what you've done in this book is the constant examples, the storytelling, throughout it from, various different size corporations. But the fact that it's that storytelling, that real tangible world excitement, that it shows that this is doable. It's not just theory. It's something you can execute, and you can execute very well if you're committed to it.
Yeah, and as you noticed reading through the book, and thanks for plowing through it that fast. That's awesome. Obviously, you're the guy before the final who crammed the night before and probably got an A. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Who made the rest of us mad had been studying all semester. But,
yeah.
Everybody else has been reading the book all week.
That's great, though. And as you notice, we used a lot of senior executives, because what we wanted to do is, it's really easy to argue this stuff off as, HR wants me to be, kind and nice to my people, so, and you give it lip service. So that's why we went to some CEOs of some of the world's most tough industrial companies who have been remarkably successful, like you read Alan Mulally, who turned around Ford, actually saved Ford from being sold. Hubert Joly, who turned around Best Buy. When Circuit City went out of business, Best Buy found a way to survive, and it was because of Hubert Joly, the amazing CEO and chairman. We interviewed Ken Chenault from American Express. When you think of the competition that's in the financial services world, I mean, how remarkable 16 years as CEO for one of the few African-American CEOs in the Fortune 500. Amazing, these individuals that we interviewed, and we got to spend time with to figure out how they integrated gratitude into their work practices. And what we found, it's not just gratitude, that's part of it, but they also talked about the other things that dovetailed into gratitude, and how you have to be clear, how you have to hold people accountable, but be turning around, doing it in positive ways. How you have to have positive intent and not kind of see the negatives in everything. So it was really enlightening for us.
This is the word that keeps coming up in a lot of our podcasts, and I feel like maybe this is the year of 2020 of authenticity. And when you talk about it, especially with being, just being kind and just showing that gratitude, for leaders and CEOs, the number one thing that you can do is just be authentic in your gratitude and showing that praise and your appreciation towards your employees, and just creating that culture where people feel that positivity, and that makes everyone else authentic in that generosity, that whenever they're just encouraging their fellow coworkers and just making sure they're doing the best absolute work. And it makes people want to go back to work every day because they feel appreciated.
Yeah, well, one of the big problems we heard is because we do a lot of workshops with, and you're exactly right, Beth, but one of the things we hear from a lot of leaders is, yeah, but if I just start doing this all of a sudden, my people are going to think I'm bogus, right? They're going to think that, he's just trying to manipulate us, this, that, and the other. And so one of the things we talk about in the book is that how you make that leap from being the tough person who just basically shuts themselves off in meetings all day. Maybe you're only focused upward, or you're only focused on your clients, not particularly on your team. And so we really go through the process of how you really make this leap then to say, look, I want to be more empathetic. I want to see the value that's going to be created. I know it's going to be good for my team. They're going to be more engaged. And what we forget is, as human beings, we love to see turnaround stories. We turn on Gordon Ramsay. He's on every TV show out there right now, is because he's all about making transformations, right? Most movies, they're about transformations and people learning something. And yet we feel like as leaders, we can't show that vulnerability. And so it just comes back to what you just said there, is we have to be a little vulnerable and say, I haven't been as good at this as I think I would. I need you to hold me accountable if I don't live up to this.
Exactly.
Well, and that kind of leads to one of the key things I took away was, we always ask the question about why would someone write this book? And, I'll paraphrase a little bit, but one of the big key takeaways to me about when I saw why this book was written was to help managers striving to engage and inspire their teams, and for the increasing number of employees who feel devalued and forgotten to reignite passion and drive in everyone. And I thought that was a real call to arms for every person in an organization at that point, from managers leading to the employees having the accountability and the responsibility to respond, and not take the gratitude for granted. So I think that to me that was a very compelling statement in the book. And again, I paraphrase, but that was something that really stood out to me. That the title is Leading with Gratitude, but it is a two-way street.
That's so funny because that particular paragraph, it's the second to last paragraph of the first chapter, and our first editor, our line editor, scratched that out and thought, it's not really necessary. You kind of said that, and that's so funny that you pulled it out, because we argued for it to go back in, because you're exactly right. this isn't just a book for leaders, as it says, but it's also a book for, as you say, for those who feel devalued and forgotten. And as we do our little company, we do a lot of employee engagement surveys, and so we'll go into an organization, we'll see, where the culture may be suffering, and where, usually there's some low-hanging fruit. We can work on this or that, and spike engagement levels and get people to feel a little bit better about working there. And inevitably, one of the lowest scoring items on every survey is feeling recognized or valued or appreciated for your work. And so it's such an easy thing to focus on, and yet why is it so hard for all of us?
Right. Yeah. Well, it sounds like Anthony, maybe he should be a writer too, huh?
Yeah.
I'm a talker. I don't know about a writer.
That's true. Now, I'll admit, Adrian, I was not able to plow through the book quite as quickly as Anthony was, but I did kind of skim through several of the chapters. And one of the things that I immediately took away is that while, of course, it's very important to be able to lead with gratitude at the workplace, I saw a lot of real life things in this book that could also be taken away for like family life or friends. I mean, showing that gratitude kind of goes beyond that, so that it can go into various facets of your life, right?
Well, absolutely, Grant. While you just got a couple of demerits for not reading the book from start to finish, you actually pulled it out by having a great question. So, as we were working on the book, I should say, we were thinking that, like you say, it's really a business book, and yet we devoted the last third to taking it home to your families, because, oftentimes we put our best selves forward at work, and by the time we hit home at 6:30, whatever time we walk through the door, sort of our best selves are spent. And, your kids are asking, hey, you got time for me? Your significant other is wondering, that sparkling personality I know you gave up the office, where is it? And so really what we did in the last third of the book was really talk about how you bring this home, and with some great ideas for some real leaders who have found ways to balance that work life and make their families feel as important as their work associates.
Well, and that's a really key piece of it. I mean, there's a lot of cultures that will preach work-life balance. That it is very difficult to achieve. Some folks feel they achieve it very easily, and they achieve it steadily. I would think the majority of the workforce probably struggles with that, especially if they're in a leadership position, because there isn't really an off. And you've got to be able to find that off time. Even though you're you're a CEO or you're department supervisor, it doesn't. I mean, leadership is leadership. I mean, you could just be someone who's just stepping up in on the factory line, and pulling an extra shift or whatever. But when you go home, to be able to take that same appreciation for your craft and apply it to the appreciation for your family, that can sometimes be a real struggle for a lot of folks. And I think that maybe, and this is just my thoughts, but I think sometimes that's folks get into like a conflict of what their motivators are, and maybe they have different motivators for work than they are for home life, and they don't maybe shift. I mean, I know you guys do a great piece with the 23 workplace motivators, and I do want to talk about that in just a minute. But I mean, do you ever see like a dynamic where people have trouble just shutting it off so they can get home and be that same sparkling personality?
Absolutely. I mean, that's so astute what you're saying, Grant, and I used to do that too when I was in the corporate world before I started writing books and consulting. As I was driving home, I used to have this little exercise where I'd pass through the canyon. I worked down in Salt Lake City in Utah, and I'd come up to Park City where I live, and I'd come through the canyon, and I'd sort of almost turn my head and say, "Stay," like you would to a bad dog, right?
Yeah.
And that was sort of the idea, was I had to let it stay there, because I mean, it always trickles in, but that was just the part where I would just say, look, stay. And so you're right, we have to create these separations, and we're all now 24/7 wired. We're answering emails at 3 a.m. when we wake up to run to the restroom for a minute, and we're all so wired. And so how do you do that? How do you shut off? One of the things we found is, look, most of the people we interviewed are extremely busy anyway. Most of them are CEOs. They run startups or they run multi-billion-dollar businesses. And so we really wanted to find out what they did. And so one thing we found is that when they got home is they really focused in on their family for as little or as much time as they had. They may not have a lot of time, but for example, Dave Kirpin, who's a CEO of a New York-based marketing firm, it's one of the fastest-growing companies in America. So he's a busy guy. He says, but we make dinner our time. And he says, we used to be when you'd get home, he'd say, we'd have the typical dinner conversation with my kids, how was your day? Fine. What'd you do? Nothing. What'd you learn? Nothing. So you know the drill. So he says, we instituted this practice where we would go around the dinner table and each person says three things. First off, your favorite moment of the day. He says, second, what a person that they're grateful for who's not at the table. And third, a person for they're grateful who's at the table but who hasn't been thanked yet. So three simple things, right? And he says, first off, my kids crazy hated it. They thought it was the stupidest thing ever. He says, but within a few weeks, they were inviting their friends over and saying, hey, by the way, you need your three things, because my dad's going to ask you your favorite moment of the day, who you're thankful for, who's not at the table, and who you're thankful at the table, who hasn't been thanked yet. And he says, it just became our thing. And so that's one of the things we talk about is how you find those ways to bring maybe some of your work smarts into your home life.
Well, and exactly. I mean, I love that part of the book because that last part about thanking someone who hasn't already been thanked. That really makes people stop for a moment, focus, and actually think about the people at that table, and and they should be thinking about them because they should be the most important people to begin with. But we get wrapped up sometimes in making sure that all of our teams at work have the best tools so they can live, or have their best life at work. But sometimes we forget to have the tools in place for our families to have their best lives away from work too. So I thought that was one part. I was so glad you guys devoted such a significant part of the book to that aspect, because I think that is something that a lot of folks struggle with. And as we jump into some of the other parts of the book that are more driven at work focus and stuff, I just wanted to kind of drive that point home that as someone who picks this book up and they buy it and they're reading it, is to understand that this is something that applies in all facets of their life.
Oh, thanks. That's much appreciated. And I think it would have been amiss if we hadn't covered, our families. And you're exactly right. We hear so much about this, where you're one person on the job, you're another person at home, and now if we've learned anything from this fully interconnected life that we live, is you can't have that. You have to be the same genuine person wherever you are.
Absolutely.
And I think if you're able to start that process at work, if you're not real grateful, it can be easier to spread to your other parts of your life as well. So.
Absolutely. And so I want to jump back into a part of the book towards the front where you bring up the gratitude gap. This was something that was very eye-catching to me in particular because of the stat you had in there, about 11 billion, that's with a B, as in big dollars, lost in the U.S. annually due to higher than necessary turnover. I mean, that was a staggering number to read.
And, the thing with big numbers is there's always a lot of things that influence turnover numbers. And what we find, though, is again, as we look at these employee engagement surveys, that there are several things that can impact your engagement. If I work in food service and I'm working in distribution, or I'm maybe a mid-level manager, the reason that I may leave an organization, we pretty well have a couple of ideas about what the problems typically may be. I don't feel valued for my work, but I don't feel like I have a voice around here. I don't feel like there's a future for me or a future for this organization. There are typically several things that we know are going to be impacting these items. And so when you look at turnover, there's some big numbers, and there's even bigger numbers than the 11 billion. And other people say it's in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Well, whatever it is, worldwide, whatever it is, we do know this is one of the contributors is people don't feel valued for their work. So and this is something we can actually do something about. And so while we know that gratitude isn't the cure for cancer, it's one of the things that will make a great organization better And it's one of the things that very, very few of us do well. One of the survey findings we have with these million people we've surveyed is about 2/3 of managers think they're actually, if they're listening to this, they think, well, this is good for other people, but I'm actually really good at this. They think about 2/3 of managers think they're above average in recognizing the great work of their employees. When we survey employees and ask them that question, it's about 23%. That's the overall number we find who say my manager is above average. So it's a 44% perception gap. You know, you could drive a Mack truck through that. We're not as good as we think we are at this, and that comes back to just the gap. Is why don't we do it, or why don't we do it well?
Right. So how do you show that gratitude? I know in the book you talk about just celebrating small wins, and no matter what you're doing, you just make sure you're acknowledging what people are doing right. But what are some recommendations that you do for people just to have immediate takeaways of how to show that gratitude towards your employees, so that way you do have less turnover?
Well, in the first half, well, I guess there's 3 parts of the book, and the first is that we're going to talk about this gratitude gap, and it's really fun, and it's interesting psychology, but it just keeps you moving, and as you guys said, it's lots of stories, and so you don't really get bogged down, and you start seeing yourself in it or others, and so it's fun. The second big part of the book, the biggest part of the book, is what we call the 8 gratitude practices, and this is just what you're talking about. It's how you look for small wins in your team, how you change your mentality to start looking for the little things that your people are doing, how you develop greater empathy and walk in your shoes, and which will lead you to finding ways to give gratitude to your people, how you can tailor gratitude to the individual versus making it one size fits all. I can't even count the number of people who I've met in my travels who are like the Starbucks guy. You know, everybody who does anything good gets the Starbucks card. You know, it doesn't matter if you saved a $1 million client or you cleaned out the supply cabinet, you get the Starbucks card. And it becomes very demotivating for people in some cases because it's not commensurate with their achievement. But in other cases, I mean, I've talked to people who say, I don't even drink coffee, so my manager gives me these cards, and I end up giving them to my neighbor. So, you know, is it personalized? Is it powerful? And is it memorable? And so that's really where we get into the ideas of, and also different ideas, you know, aligning gratitude to your core values. So it's not just, hey, thanks for sharing your lunch with me. No, it's actually meaningful to the organization, and how you develop greater levels of peer-to-peer recognition, too. So this isn't just on a manager's shoulders.
Well, and that's the thing is, you know, at the end of the day, it's, you know, trying to know your team a little bit better and maybe stop and listening a little bit more with them as well, for that personalization. You know, that story about the gift card, you know, when I read that, I was like, you know, how demoralizing, excuse me, would that be? You know, you have someone who saves, you know, tens of thousands of dollars for a company, and, you know, and in one moment they're receiving a gift card and they feel appreciated, even if the nominal amount was smaller. Then, you know, like I said, the next person, you know, they get the same thing because you did a great job organizing the closet. And then all of a sudden it just kind of just knocks the wind out of your sails. And one thing we actually did here about a year ago or so is our People Success team actually sent out a survey asking us to fill out like what our favorite candy was, what our favorite drink was. Was it a soda drink? Was it a energy drink? Was it a beer? I mean, whatever, to find out what we actually liked and what was important to us and things that we would actually appreciate. And as a company, when we hit a goal and we won, that's what was delivered, you know, to your desk was what was important to you and was meaningful to you. So, you know, one person may have had a 6-pack of, you know, some nasty IPA, Grant, you know, and someone else may have had a thing of Skittles or whatever. But I mean, it was always something that actually connected with them on a personal level. And so regardless of whether you spent $9 on one and $3 on another, the value was consistent because it meant something to each person individually.
Love that. I love that idea. You know, and it can be as simple as that, right? You know, Chester and I, we were in an organization doing some consulting once, and it was about the Christmas time, holiday time, and so they were going to give a gift to all their people for the holidays, and we thought, isn't that nice? And she said, we're giving everybody pewter bowls. And this is a manufacturing organization in the heartland of America, most of the guys, blue-collar guys, we said, you're giving pewter bowls to your workforce. So, more than 100 people, probably 80% of them guys working down doing machining. And we said, why? She goes, well, because everybody loves pewter bowls. And the idea was, no, she loved pewter bowls.
Yeah.
And so,
I'm sitting here shaking my head.
Exactly. And one of the problems, too, is, and this isn't a bad thing, but we do cash a lot, too. Now, cash is nice. We all like cash. If you ask me, would you rather have $10 or movie tickets, I'd say, give me the $10.
That's right.
Yeah.
We all want the cash. And yet what we find is actually cash, unless it's a lot of money. If you got a couple of $1,000, give them cash. That's great. But if you only have small amounts of money, just what you're saying is so much more meaningful. Actually, they found out what my favorite candy bar was, or they found out something else that was meaningful to me. So, for example, maybe for me, I'm all about creativity and working autonomously. Maybe if I worked for you, you'd recognize me by giving me a chance to work on a new project that will allow me to use my creative juices. That could be actually recognition for me. And you haven't really spent anything. You've actually got me to work harder, but I'm feeling recognized because that's meaningful to me. Where Chester, my co-author, his top motivator is friendship and fun and ideas like that. To recognize him, you'd probably send him to a conference and have him network and meet new people. He'd love that. And yet we're very different. So what we find is great leaders take a little extra time to get to know their people and really tailor their recognition, their gratitude to things that will be meaningful to them.
Right. This reminds me of the book Giftology a lot, like putting a lot of thought into the gifts that you're giving to make sure that they really have an impact on the people you're giving them to, rather than just having the same gift and spreading it to everyone. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, and one of my favorite stories out of this book, mainly because I'm a huge Texas Roadhouse fan, was the interview with Kent Taylor, and I loved what he said, and we've actually had other guests on who've echoed this same thing when they talk about low turnover, high engagement with their team that transcends into magnificent engagement at the consumer relationship level, where he said that employees are number one, the customer is number two, and how we treat our employees reflects how they will treat our customers. And it goes back to that thoughtfulness. When you are able to foster that, I have to believe, because I know it works for us, but I'd have to believe that when you foster that thoughtfulness, that will transcend to that conversation with that consumer, which will then create a bond and a better understanding of why they're doing what they're doing, so that consumer says, wow, these people actually care and I want to spend my money with them.
I love that. Yeah, and we've actually spent quite a bit of time with Kent Taylor, who's the founder of Texas Roadhouse now. 600 restaurants, 80,000 employees. What a success story. And so, Kent, when he was coming up through the different chains, he worked for KFC, he worked for Bennigan's, he worked for a lot of different chains. He even had 9 months at Hooters, he tells us, and which was kind of a hoot when he tells you those stories. But he says, as I was coming up, he says, every restaurant I would pitch new ideas, every place I was at, because I had new ideas for menu items, this, that, and the other. He said nobody gave him the time of day. He says, so I make sure I listen to my people. But he says, when I go to a restaurant, he's even though he's got more money than a couple of thousand regular people combined, when he goes still tours around. He goes to his restaurants, and he says the first thing he does, he walks into the back, goes to the meat cutters, he meets with the dishwashers, talks to the servers, goes to meets with the bar folks. He said, the last person I talk to is the manager. He says, because by that point, I know if the person's full of crap or not by talking to their people. How's their engagement? How they feeling? How are they, how the new menu items work? And he says, there's ways you can get people talking. And he says, if we take care of our employees, they're going to take care of our guests. It's just a no-brainer. And yet, how many places do I go where we put customers first? And you can't do that. That's just not a way to run a business. If you put your people first, they will put your customers first. They will see it from your example. And that's what has made Kent Taylor so successful over the years at Texas Roadhouse.
Well, I tell you, they do a great job at the one here we have in town. I visit them often. I think I have to have a part-time job to support my Texas Roadhouse habit, actually. But I mean, but just, again, the book is chock full of these real-life examples that, I mean, like I said, it was a page turner. I mean, it's inspiring, and it's one of those things that it's all derived off of the research that you guys are doing. And one of the things that you talk about in the book, and I think you've talked about it in one of the others too, is about the workplace motivators and how they varied, depending on, maybe it's my motivation may be different than Grant's or Beth's, but typically, there are some that are in the top echelon usually, and then the one that shocked me that was at the bottom was money. I mean, I'm kind of greedy, I guess, because money's pretty important to me. It kind of goes, I guess it's a threshold conversation. But, talk to us a little bit about how you guys pulled that research, because you've got tens of thousands of people who have taken this.
Yeah, we have. We're up to over 75,000 people who have taken our motivators assessment. And by the way, afterwards, I'll send the three of you some codes so you can take it. I'm really curious, Tony, where money does fall on your... Now, after you say that, but what we find, this is an interesting one, because there's a lot of psychologists who'll tell you money is not a motivator. Well, what we found is actually you can't make broad brush statements about everybody. Money is a motivator for some people. Absolutely it is. If you don't have money, money is a huge motivator. And yet what we find is that if people are making enough money to pay their bills and to do what they need to in life, other things become more of a motivator than money. Money is more of what we call either a satisfier than a motivator. And so if I'm not making enough, I might not be satisfied and I might move on. It's also what we call a threshold issue. So if I cross the threshold and I'm making enough to pay my bills, other things are going to keep me engaged, probably. And so we find about 10% of the world is, in the working world, from the 75,000 people who have taken the assessment, is motivated by money. The rest have other motivators that that are very high for them. Making an impact is very high, especially for millennials. People in their 20s want to make an impact. They want to learn and grow. Is a high motivator. And when you talked earlier about, and I think it was Grant was talking about connecting our work and our homes, family is actually the third highest motivator of 23 human possibilities that we have. We developed this motivators assessment with a team of psychologists and psychometricians, people who build assessments. It took us several years. The folks who wrote Emotional Intelligence 2.0, Drs. Gene Greaves and Travis Bradbury, helped us create this assessment. So it's 100 questions online, so you can't game the system. It's enough that, I love these, 7 questions, and you're going to find out which Star Wars character you are. That's not what this is. This is extremely scientifically based, and it'll help you. It spits out really what you're motivated by in life. And what we find is the chances of you and I having the top 7 motivators in common is more than 1,000,000 to 1. We're all very different. And that's why, the old world of I manage people the same because that's fair, we have learned it's a terrible way to manage people. We're all very different. I mean, you got to treat people the same with the rules. If somebody sexually harasses somebody, there's no question about that. That's easy. But how you motivate people and how you inspire people is going to be very different based on what they're motivated by. Are they motivated by ideas like learning and development and helping others? And maybe they're more of a builder, or are they more about fun and empathy and family, and they're more of a caregiver? And they're all good. They're all great motivators, but it's going to be very different how we motivate the person based on those.
So, Adrian, you've listed a lot of the different types of motivators. Do you have any idea, like, the total amount of motivators that are possible on the test that you give out?
We have 23 motivators that we identified, which is also, the strands of DNA, but it was just a coincidence. But what we find is that we could have included other motivators. We used a process. It took us several years. We did alpha and beta testing with thousands of people. We started with more than 40 potential motivators and whittled it down to about 23, where we didn't see duplication, where we found uniques. What we did not include were negative motivators. because fear is a motivator. I mean, if you threaten my job, I will probably work harder for you for a time. I can't keep it up. It's going to be like deer in headlights syndrome. Eventually, I'm going to either freeze or just burn out. But I can, fear is a motivator. We did not include that because it's not a positive motivator. So all these are very positive ideas. So even if something falls 23, if money fell, for instance, 23 out of your 23, it doesn't mean you hate money. It just means that it's not as motivating day to day as other ideas. And so what's really enlightening is you start looking at these, especially the top ideas and also the bottom ideas, because it's really helpful. We've used this with teams as they look at promoting people, and they find out that Craig, who they thought was going to be the next manager, has number 23 out of 23 is teamwork, number 22 is developing others, number 21 out of 23 is service, and they kind of find out this guy's a lone wolf. He's really good at what he does, but he shouldn't be managing other people, and it can really help figure out how to promote people, how to develop them, as well as how to motivate them and reward them.
So can your motivators change throughout your, obviously whatever your current situation is? So how often do those actually change? Or how often do you recommend having someone take those tests?
Right. It's a good question, because we found actually, and we thought, oh my gosh, every time something happens in your life, especially something big, you have a child, you get a divorce, you get a new job, your motivators will change. And actually we found that doesn't really happen. The motivators change, but they change very gradually over your lifetime. What's motivating to you in your 20s may be very different from what motivates you in your 50s, but it may take a decade or two to change. They're not going to change overnight, and they typically won't change even by big life events. Now, with that said, you can swing, you can change, and you might even want to develop some things that aren't very, very positive right now. I've had people who take it and realize they're not really motivated in any way of leading other people, but they want to. They want to be more empathetic. And so they can work on those things to try and get them to be more something that they care about, and that takes time and effort and a process.
Well, I know that as I was looking at some of the different motivators that you guys mentioned in the list there. Ones that and I'd be interested to see where I come out too. By the way, on the Star Wars 7 questions, I'm Darth Vader.
I was thinking Yoda because he's so old.
Oh, wow. Old jokes. Wow. Man. Oh, fired are you? No, just kidding, Beth. We love you. But the autonomy and creativity were two of the ones that jumped off the page to me right away because, we're in marketing. There's a lot of things that I love to do as far as looking at opportunities to grow the business, with training the team and coaching that out. But at the same time, I love the autonomy factor of being able to kind of just get in and do some things that really drive me, that I have a passion for. And so I love the fact that you have such even though it's 23, some people might think that's not a lot, but it's really 23 really good focused areas to look at there, from, like you said, from team building to creativity to money, family, fun, etc. There's a lot of things that are in there that, as I was just looking through the list in the book, I was like, this would be actually really hard to start assigning a value to if I had to sit down and do it. If I just had to rank them 1 through 23, that would be very difficult.
Yeah.
That's why the system does it for you and answering questions, and it's really great. And what we found was really interesting, too, because when we first wrote the book, we thought, just like you're talking about, it'll be so enlightening for people to take this, and they go, oh, my gosh. Well, you know what? There's a very good chance creativity and autonomy will score pretty high for you. There'll probably be a few other surprises up there. But what gets really interesting is when you sit down, the three of you, and Beth says, oh, my gosh, Grant, I had no idea you're wired that way. And Tony says to Beth, now I see why sometimes when we're working together, there can be a little bit of a conflict on this.
You picked that up already, Adrian? You are really good at this.
So that's part of the aha of this. Is really cool not only you find out who you are, but most importantly, you find out what your team members or those people who work for you, how they're wired. And does that help you provide gratitude that's meaningful to them? Absolutely, as well as career development advice, etc.
Well, we would absolutely love to take those just to kind of see where we all fall in. I have a feeling I think I know where Grant is,
We call him G Harmony because he's just like the perfect
He's all
balance.
about friendship.
That's
you know,
right.
I'm the empathizer, so I think it'd be fun to figure out what each of us are.
I don't think Beth and Tony could be on the podcast without me in here together. So.
Well, Adrian,
we're yin and yang. It's okay.
we're so excited and happy that you were able to join us today on the podcast. And I know, obviously, your book, Leading with Gratitude, is going to be coming out on March 3rd. But can you tell us where everyone can get your book, if they can download it off of Amazon, all of the good stuff, all the details?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's available wherever fine books are sold. So get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, wherever you'd like to shop. And we also have some giveaways, too. If you go to leadingwithgratitudebook.com, if you order a book, you actually get a free motivators code. So how cool is that? It's usually $40, but it's free if you order a book and send us a receipt. So that sort of answers the question of how you get a code and for everybody who's listening. So, yeah, and thanks for asking.
Awesome. Well, we will put that code in our description. And but once again, we truly appreciate your time that you've taken out. We're so excited for the launch of this book, and we're excited for all the other books. So I'm sure that you're already drafting up right now. But for all of our QSR Nation listeners, you can find all of our podcasts at qsrnationpodcast.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, anything that has a social connection. You can probably find us there. You can find our weekly vlogs that we do, as well as our podcast. But until next week, we will talk to you then. Be sure to join us again for the next episode of QSR Nation.